Joel, sing us in.
Suicide prevention is the name of this show. We want you to stay. We don't want you to go.
That's the best you got?
That's the best I got.
Well, on that note, let's just not... Hey everyone, welcome to SPSM Chat. As the good Doc Foreman would say, we are live. I'm Rudy Caceres, and we're talking death care with the death doula, or just one of many, I guess. Sula Johnson is going to talk about all the cool stuff that she's up to, and I'm going to have some cool co-hosts as well, because Lord knows I have very little to say about very much. Before we get into that, if you're watching this live, whether you're on Facebook, facebook.com/SPSMchat, twitter.com/SPSMchat, we are, of course, at SPSM. Make sure to use that hashtag SPSM, of course, on all your tweets so we can give you some shout outs and you can join the conversation. youtube.com/SPSMchat. Rest in peace to mixer.com/SPSMchat. Don't get me started on that. But also go to spsmchat.com to go read blogs and stuff. Without further ado, let's get on to our round rectangle of lovely co-hosts. First and foremost, hi everyone. My name is Rudy Caceres, at Rudy Caceres on Twitter. Thank you for joining us. We are so close to our 1-year anniversary of SPSM Chat, the version 3.0, if you will. So I'm glad that I get to have on two of our newer co-hosts. And so let's get right into the swing of things. That's all I have to say. What does Carly have to say?
Hi, guys. I am a neurodivergent, non-abstinent person in recovery, working on developing the peer workforce here in good old Colorado, and everyone's possibly favorite nihilistic cat lady.
There's a lot of competition. So I want to make sure I get something out of the way, and it's a heavy topic, probably more so than today's topic, and that is, give us the Carly brand update.
Just working on, we're about to launch a program statewide that is working on developing the peer workforce, offering some supervision to some peers who don't have supervision. I am also going through some hair changes, so that's going to be a pretty big deal. I think that's about it. There's not much exciting.
All right. How's the Joel brand going?
The Joel brand is going fine. Thank you. Dr. Joel Schwartz, clinical psychologist in Torrance, California, doing teletherapy, telehealth right now, specializing in neurodivergent folks. Neurodivergent myself, and everybody at my practice is neurodivergent. We are working on creating content to educate other mental health providers about neurodivergence and teach them how to work with folks like us.
Tell the whole world, the whole SPSM Chat universe, galaxy, Sula system, who is Sula Johnson.
Hi, y'all. I just want to say that I am not the death doula. I am just a death doula. So I appreciate the title. I am a death doula. I like to chat and contemplate mortality. I work with people to do the same and help facilitate a good death, wherever that may be.
So before we get into the swing of things, Sula, can you just break down Barney style, like what you do as a death doula on like a day-by-day basis?
Sure. It's so different for everyone. People engage with death doulas at all different stages of existence. So some people get in touch with doulas to consult on options for end of life, creating advanced care plans, medical directives, just to facilitate a conversation or a contemplation with themselves or their family on what options they have for death one day. And then doulas also come in, in the active dying stage, and help, or I shouldn't say help, remind people how to care for the dying by facilitating, legacy projects or sitting vigil or actual like the details of physical care. And then they also work with people who have died and their loved ones in the post-death experience of making decisions on how to create ritual and ceremony around life and end of life. So people engage with doulas at any stage in life and death.
So you probably have a response to this by now. Like, what do you tell people when they ask you, like, whether it's just a stranger on the street or whatever, what do you do for a living?
Well, yeah, I mean, I like to exist in many ways. So I have a job that, helps pay the bills, and I'm still learning as a death doula and an end-of-life guide, but I do consult in that space. And I'm kind of getting in the practice of saying that I do many things, because I think it's not fair for any of us to just say we exist in one space and we make money in this one space and this is who we are and identify in one place. So I do try and give a whole picture of who I am and how I operate in the world. And death care is definitely a big part of it.
All right, so before we get into the swing of things with our first question, any other follow-ups from Joel or Carly? Anything you want to say before we get into question number one?
Let's talk about some death.
Yeah, I'm just glad that there's a market for you, because we've been talking off the show on chat about how terrible America is at death, and how much these kinds of discussions are needed. So I can't wait to hear what you have to say.
Thanks for having me. I jump at the opportunity to talk about death because nobody else wants to. So
welcome to our group. It's all we talk about.
Yes, you came to the right place. And let's get into it. Question number one, what makes a good death? And shout out to Sula for coming up with this question. And question number two, like, this is probably the shortest worded question we've ever had. We've had some big ones. We've had like things where it's gotten really hard to fit it all into the little banner thing. So Thank you for that, Sula. I appreciate that. And I think it's open enough where anyone can really answer whatever their background is. But I want to hear from Sula first and foremost. Let's get into it.
Yeah. I love this question. I love thinking about this question. I love talking about this question. I also realize, like, what I think is a good death isn't even, it's not the starting point. I think what I want to kind of highlight with this question is that what makes a good death is really dependent on how we treat life and existence. So a good death really starts in life. So when we talk about people who are existing in marginalized spaces, if people, people who are fighting to exist in a white supremacist patriarchal culture, you can't think about having a good death when you're just fighting to exist in this culture and it still tries to kill you, And so I just want to acknowledge that even this question is such a privileged place to be even able to contemplate. So I think, I just wanted to put that out there. And that's really like a foundation for me and my work in creating a good death. I think that advocacy and justice work in life, death work starts in life is my biggest point. And so I want to always be dismantling my whiteness as a white woman in the death care field and in the world, and fighting for people's existence to fully thrive and survive, because that's a part of my death doula work. I can't make a green burial won't take away from a violent existence. So Yes, I love the idea of green burial. For myself, I know what a good death would be for me, but for me, there's no general statement on what a good death is, except for the first point, which is making sure that people are able to exist in this world fully. And beyond then, it's just a completely subjective experience. Like, I want something for my death that is completely different from what any of you may want for your death. And that's what needs to be honored in death care and the funeral industry and the whole end-of-life death trade.
Now, were you ever hesitant to get into this field because you were worried about everyone calling you Sula the Doula?
You know what? I use that hashtag. I just jumped to it. I was like, fuck it. I'm going to take that and use it immediately before anybody else tries to use it against me or something. So yes, I actually use that hashtag on my Instagram, Sula the Doula. It's just too easy.
Speaking of, let's just go to Carly. I'm not going to go there.
That's a really hard answer to follow up on. I agree with like everything Sula said. And when I was thinking about a good death, I was thinking about a lot of things that like marginalized folks don't necessarily have access to. So for me, that was a good death as being one where the person is taken care of leading up to it, up until like the very last moment. And I think that we do a lot of failing around that in this country. I think there's got to be a source of agency in there, kind of mimicking Sula's subjectiveness. Is I think the person who is dying has to have a say, and their want should be respected, whether that is how it's going to end or what kind of burial or who gets to show up to their funeral, like everything. What kind of place are they in as they're kind of passing on, I think is a huge thing too. And I think minimal suffering. I was thinking more like the acute dying part, but I really like what Sula said is we have to look at the whole life. And if there's just a ton of suffering, I don't think that's like the kind of passing that we always want.
What say you? Oh, sorry.
When I did ask that question, when I thought of it, I did want to hear like what everyone's personal good death would be. So I understand that I opened with this like general, huge kind of vast world to exist in the good death conversation, but I do want to know, like, do you want cookies?
I want to be married and I want to be buried in a mushroom spore suit. So like the green burial, but just making sure that like my toxins aren't ruining the environment. I've done some reading on this. My death would absolutely be like hopefully quick and painless. Yeah.
Speaking of ruining the environment, what say you, Dr. Joel?
What say I? So, I can't help but come from my own cultural background on this. I was raised in a Jewish family, and I know the traditions fairly well, even though I'm not very traditional myself. And I love what Sula said about it starts in life. And there's this Jewish proverb that was kind of ringing in my head about don't be overwhelmed by how much is going on in the world. It's not our job to finish the task, but we're not free to abandon the task either. And it has to do with social justice issues and all sorts of things. And I'm recognizing that there's a privilege to being able to define what is your work, what is your life's work when you're fighting all the time just to survive. But I think even in those moments of quiet, if we had a culture talking about these things, even something small can be incredibly meaningful. And recognizing that this is your work and this is your calling, and setting up ways to continue that work when you're gone, and the continuation of your ideals, your soul. I think that would be a beautiful thing. And for me, that resonates with me too. As far as how I die, I don't really care. I'd rather it be painless, but I don't think we get a choice in that matter. So what I do think we have a choice in is setting up things beforehand to continue who we are, in whatever way possible. I do know that the death industry is a bunch of thieves, and I want my family to spend whatever money they can on things that are important to them and on meaningful engagement or social change, and not on $40,000 burial plot in a cemetery. Put my ashes in the ocean if you want, or that it will ruin the environment. Sorry, going back to that. Whatever you guys want to do with me is fine. Just make sure the organs get donated to people who need them.
Let me ask you, Joel, if I were to die, would you come to my funeral?
Absolutely.
Okay, well then.
I would lead the karaoke singing at the funeral because I know that's what you would want.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of just want to have like something where people just shove my body into like a mayonnaise jar and just throw me into the back of the fridge, just like totally desecrate everything I've ever stood for, because I'm dead and we might as well just have some fun with it, right?
I have some body parts claimed by various friends, so I cannot be buried with some parts.
That is awesome. Okay.
I was thinking we would recreate the wood chipper scene in Fargo, maybe something like that.
I want people to like kick my head around like a volleyball and just really like I just want to be of service to people in past death, and I don't think I can do that in a coffin, in underground, or in an urn.
Yeah.
Whatever you want. We're recording this, right? So we can send it to all your family.
That's right. That's right.
This is our living will.
Okay, good.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Put my ashes into a Nerf football and play with them.
Done. Consider it done. And that takes us to question number 2. It's another short one. What are your fears around death? And if you're watching this on the social media platforms, Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter, make sure that you give your own response as well. If you're on Twitter, especially, make sure to use the hashtag SPSM. The tweets are already going out. Actually, I think this one will go out in about a few minutes. But if you're watching the live stream, guess what? You're already ahead of the curve. So respond to the tweet that says Q2 and reply A2, and you're good to go. And we'll make sure to show you some love. I don't think anyone's moderating the Twitter chat tonight, but I'll go in there manually later on and make sure that all your voices are heard. Give all the retweets, give all the hearts, because you all deserve that. Oh, okay. Question number 2. What are your fears around death? Let's go to Sula.
Yeah, I think this is like such a necessary question to constantly be in conversation about. I really want to also share that as a doula, like I haven't come to some final beautiful moment of acceptance about death. I have just as much fear and anxiety, maybe not just as much, but I have fear and anxiety that I have always held, which actually propelled me to kind of get further into the field. For me, it's not pain, it's not suffering, it's not the physical death. I think I have more fear around losing others and grief. I'm scared of grief and how it operates. I think grief is it's so unique to every single person and their relationship with the loss, that I think its unpredictability kind of scares the shit out of me. I have this fear that I'm going to be completely sideswiped by grief and won't ever be able to recover. It's like this story that I tell myself over and over, that it's just going to essentially like the loss will overwhelm me and I won't be able to function. So it's a very deep fear that I've had my whole life. I grew up as an only child with a single mom up to at my teen years, and that relationship and that bond and that dependence just on one person, while it's so special, it's like it almost the experience of things that feel so precious. I go occasionally to this space of doom or losing them. So that's really where my fears around death show up, is grieving my loved ones.
Tell us your fears, Carly.
So I was more thinking, like, personally, what am I scared about for my own death? And I think number one is I'm really scared about dying in pain. I just don't like being in pain generally. And I know that so many deaths are really centered around that. So that's a pretty big deal to me. I think having loss of control over my body and my life is also something that really makes me uncomfortable. And that could manifest in many different ways, but I think losing agency is kind of a big deal. And then Sula was saying, grief. I think as much as I like to pretend that everybody hates me, I feel like some people would have hurt feelings if I died. And I don't want to hurt people's feelings. And I know that like grief can be really powerful. And I would just kind of be sad to leave some people behind in whatever capacity that might be. I think for me, grief has always been a really weird thing. For when my grandpa died, I was literally told that like I wasn't allowed to cry and wasn't allowed to like do anything because my mom had to have all the feelings. There was like minimal feelings that could be had. It was a pie in my family, and I didn't get any of the pie. And so like since then, like having animals die, having anyone die, it's like it's stuff that I still haven't processed and worked through, and it brings about numbness, but I know it doesn't bring about numbness for other people, and I don't like causing people harm. So,
you know, something I find interesting, and I've heard this from a handful of people, that one of the reasons why they wouldn't want to take their own life is because they're too afraid of like the physical pain of dying. And so like that's one of the only things that keeps them from dying by suicide. What do you think of that? And Sula or Joe can hop in as well. I just think that's like it's weird to think of the suicide rates would be much higher, I guess, if there was like less painful ways to die. As weird as that sounds, I hope that's coming out right.
I mean, my suicide attempt was using alcohol, which was essentially for me at the time, not necessarily painless, but a continuation of what I was basically doing every day. And so, you know, there's ways it was painful, but as somebody who really problematically used alcohol for a long time, that was stuff I was really used to. So that was kind of an easy way. I am someone who is still chronically suicidal and don't have a plan because everything seems like it might be painful or I might mess it up and then be like in real rough shape having to live out my life. So yeah, I think that is something like I am kind of scared of pain that comes with that. And so there hasn't been a replacement method for me, which is a protective factor, but also sometimes makes me feel like really trapped and helpless.
Tell us your fears, Joel.
I am wary to go away from the importance of what Carly was saying, and I just want to say I've only spoken with you a few hours, but your presence would be missed. And I imagine the fear of, if you're living a life of pain versus the pain of hurting oneself, that between those two sounds like a pretty sucky way to be, a sucky way to live one's life. And I'm genuinely sorry for those who are living that way. Sorry isn't the right, I empathize. I feel for you. Death is interesting. So, you know, we can talk about conscious and unconscious fears. Unconscious fears, I think I'm as scared as everybody else. If I see something dangerous coming towards me, I'm not the type of person who stands my ground. I'm like, I'm going to preserve my life. I'm going to get out of here. You can stand your ground. I'm not going to take that. But more consciously, you know, going back to my upbringing again, I come from a Holocaust family, and tales of death have been in my blood since I was born. and the inevitability of death has been part of my narrative for a long time. I guess I fear pain like anybody else, but I don't fear death. I know it's inevitable. The thing that I fear the most is not having done enough with the time that I had. And on the opposite end of that, trying not to be too perfectionistic, being like, it's okay to spend some time playing some video games. That's not so horrible. But at the same time, wanting to keep myself honest about, am I building something worthwhile? And did I do enough for the people that I love, or did I just waste that time away? Because we're all very limited on time. So that's my fear, I guess, is regret at the end of life more than anything else.
Mm-hmm.
Well, hopefully you never regret being a part of our SPSM family.
No.
All right. Any other things to add before we get on to our next question?
No, I hear that. I just want to say I totally, I hear all of your experiences. I have felt the same way. Yeah.
Question number 3, and it is a doozy. Why is our Eurocentric culture so scared of death, and how does that influence the field of suicide prevention? See, they can get wordy. Take it away, Sula Johnson.
Well, I just want to say, I have no experience in the field of suicide prevention. And to the comment on the Eurocentric culture, I'm also I don't have a whole history degree in the death practices of around the world. So, but one thing that I do know and can speak to is the way, and it's more like the Western capitalistic culture that we exist in. I think because, after the Civil War, we took death out of the homes, or death was taken from us out of our homes and institutionalized. And that's when embalming was introduced as a way to preserve bodies from war that were being shipped around the country. But then it kind of became commodified. Death became commodified in a way where the funeral industry developed and was like, hey, we can actually just take care of this for you. We'll embalm the body and show you this package. And it created this very one single lane experience for death. And it really kind of started the narrative of selling this one type of boxed experience of post-death practice and care. And so while we had actually been taking care of our dead in our homes for hundreds of years, predominantly women doing that work, it was suddenly, a bunch of white guys creating the funeral industry. But how I feel that might relate to, suicide prevention, or just the suicide prevention field, I'm not sure the terminology, is that I think maybe that same notion that this experience of death being this, boxed up in a bow with makeup on, it kind of draws parallels to maybe some of the shame and the stigmatization that surrounds suicidal ideation and contemplation and completing suicide, that there is maybe, it doesn't fall into the box of how that whole experience was sold to us to be. So I'm just thinking that there is some parallel there without having too much experience in that field at all. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, death care in suicide, it is a little different just because of all the shame behind it, and it's sudden. You don't really, the family doesn't get together and plan that your loved one is going to die by suicide.
Yes.
So it's just all of a sudden you have this, for lack of a better word, big mess, and it has to be physically cleaned up. It has to be handled in a way where you are cognizant of certain cultural stigmas towards suicide. Not everyone in the family wants it to get out. We've dealt with that in the past, where Like if someone dies by any other method, or like cancer, we name you, like everyone knows it's no big deal if it gets out into the public. Whereas with suicide, it must be this closely guarded secret.
Right. Yeah, and I think that it's just a similar. There's a parallel with the kind of the way that the funeral industrial complex operates, in that it doesn't fall into the box of how the death was sold to us to exist in. And so it's kind of an extension of that sentiment.
What say you, Carly?
So I think about, like, there are some indigenous communities that the way that they celebrate death is just so much different than us. And that includes suicide. And I think here in America, and especially Eurocentric culture, we really shame and stigmatize suicide. And I think a big part of that, kind of like Sula is saying, is it doesn't fit what we think death should be. And it centers the feelings of everyone around. And so, like each of us said, we would feel bad for leaving behind people. But I also don't think that that should necessarily be the number one kind of thought as this stuff is happening. And like, that's a lot of suicide prevention is like, what about the people you leave behind? Cool. But like, what about this person who does not want to exist anymore? They have to walk through their day. So I think we like really mask a lot of emotions. We really like compartmentalize grief in a certain places. Like you get a little bit of leave, right? But longer than a couple weeks, people are looking at you weird and telling you to get over it. I also think we like really like hide the elderly and people that we see physically dying. We like shove to the side, don't want to talk about them, put them away, and just like separate ourselves from death, like in so many different ways. The wellness industrial complex is all about cheating death. There's so much media around like living this super healthy life so you can live a long time. And like, I don't want to live like to my 80s, 90s. I'm good. But it's like this idea of like cheating death. And so I think how this plays out in suicide prevention is like we get so focused on prohibiting death. We don't honor the reasons that people might not want to be here. We don't honor them as an individual who is suffering or just not wanting to exist. It's really just like, we don't want you to die and we need you to stay here. And we're going to do everything we can to keep you here, regardless of what you want. And I'm not going to go further into that because that's my answer to the next question. So
nice.
Sure. I just want to add that. Sorry, can I just jump in before?
That's fine. That's fine. You're the guest.
Totally, Carly. And I think like that whole, what happened with the funeral industry is they made death dirty for us. It's like this dirty thing. A dead body is dirty. It's diseased. It needs to be taken away. It needs to be out of sight, out of mind. And there's also like with people who are just aging, we do everything to keep them alive. They might be, you know, their quality of life might not be what they want it to be, but we have such a fear that controls that takes away from really centering the experience of a person who is even trying to die naturally, because, you know, so often the medical industry will do everything in its power to keep that person alive. So I just wanted to add that it's a whole thing.
So what Sula said about the death industry coming out of the Civil War and white men solidified something for me that I've been thinking about this question a lot, actually. And what Sula just said kind of gave me, I think, a bit of insight into some of the things that I've been thinking about and reading. I'm going to go on a little bit of a tangent here, but I'm going to come back to it. It's important. Right now, I'm reading this amazing book called My Grandmother's Hands by Resmaa Menakem. I don't know how it's pronounced, Menakem. And it's essentially about how trauma by both aggressor and victim becomes dissociated and pushed away. And if enough of this happens, it becomes culture and institutions. And the hypothesis of the book is that racism is a systemized distancing of shame of being the aggressor among so many people. And it started when these same people were traumatized by their European ancestors. And they just repeated this trauma onto the people of color that they saw in America. And so coming back to the question, I'm wondering how much of the death industry developed as a result of shame of the Civil War, of shame and how we've treated each other, shame and we just push that shame, push it away, and we don't deal with our feelings of death. We don't deal with the disappointments. We don't deal with the ways that we weren't there for each other. And by pushing away that shame, it becomes systemized in this where we're willing to pay so much money just to have other people do this labor that we can really do ourselves. But we're willing to pay, tens of thousands of dollars to have somebody else do that, so we don't have to wrestle with those feelings. And how it goes into suicide prevention, I think Carly and Sula said it. It's the role of shame and distancing death and not dealing with the traumas of our existence and the difficulties of what we do to each other is directly responsible for suicidality, I would say. So hopefully that made sense. I feel like.
Any follow-up, Sula?
No, I totally agree. Yeah, really. Yeah.
All right. So while we have a few extra minutes, let's check in with Twitter because it's been a while. And So Adriana Conley, in response to question number 2, says, my fear around death is leaving my family behind. I always worry about how others will be. I know when it comes my time, I'd be worried about how they will go after I'm gone. Thank you, Adriana. Best wishes in your social work class. Questioning Jen says, in response to question number 1, voluntary assisted dying legislation, which is accessible to everyone. Death is an embodied process, but for most of us, it happens in systems of care. I want to say when and how. Sanford James says, in response to question number 1, a good death? Well, I imagine a good death is an accepted death in some fashion. I'm reminded of 5 phases of death. Acceptance, I guess. Thank you, Sanford. Adriana, in response to question number 1, says, being surrounded by the ones you love and accepting what life has been for you, not focusing on what ifs and focusing on accomplishments. And that takes us to our 4th and final question, and that would be, why does our fear of death mean we are, sorry, it sounds weird. Why does our fear of death mean we are okay taking away someone's agency? Take it away, Sula Johnson.
Well, I think, with to kind of further go on the foundation that we just talked about in the culture that has been created, by not having these conversations, by not creating a space and an environment for us to contemplate our mortality, it keeps it in the dark. It keeps it scary. It keeps it dirty. It keeps it somewhere else. And in doing that, we lack the opportunity to make space for empathizing in our human experience and in our suffering. And without that piece, without the space to say, this existence is so hard, I'm suffering, without being able to share that in a way which I don't feel like we're totally there in our culture. You know, that's when the systems come in and want to control, you know, if it is brought up, they want to control out of fear. And it's kind of the idea, like, if we haven't done the work ourselves, then how can we recognize it in anybody else? And so exploring our mortality and contemplating our existence is so not just necessary in creating, I think, a beautiful life and existence, but it's necessary in not causing harm to people who are experiencing suffering and making them feel more isolated in that experience. So yeah, I hope that kind of answered the question, but I think that the culture that we've created wants to control, because it hasn't done we haven't facilitated the exploration within our institutions, within our relationships, within our families, within how we operate in the world. Like, it's still over there. So when people even bring up suicidal ideation, it just like is a trigger point, I'm sure, for everything to go into motion of like fixing and saving and silencing, and further puts those people in a space where they're alone.
It's okay if you're not feeling like you have all of the words ready to go, Sula, because Carly is about to drop the information.
So I think, going off of what Sula said, is we see death as, for some reason, the worst thing that can happen to somebody, completely ignoring the awful things that people live with every single day. And so if you think that death is the worst thing that can happen, and if you think that you are wanting to like save and help people, then you believe that you need to prevent death no matter what. And that includes taking away somebody's rights. I know that there was a police shooting during a welfare check. I don't remember the guy's name, and that was very disrespectful, and I apologize. But I know that there was a wellness check called. They killed him, and then they were like, well, he was a danger to himself, which I'm assuming is going to mean that he was expressing suicidal ideation. And it's like, the irony of that, of like, they took his life. They didn't let him take his own life, but yet it was okay for them to take it. So we allow the world to harm us, and we allow other people to take away our rights, but we don't allow an individual to decide to take away their life. And just like suicide, like, yeah, when suicidal ideation is mentioned, like, it flips and people get committed. People are institutionalized. Their rights are taken away. They're treated like toddlers and like babies. Like, they don't understand the decision they're making. And it's belittling and demeaning and just really ignorant of how exhausting it is for some people to exist and how hard being a human being is. And are you really supportive of someone's life and of them as like a whole person if you don't also let them opt out? And if the only way that you can let someone stay here is by taking away their rights and taking them out of their life, like, how does that make sense? It's infuriating. And to think about how many wellness checks happen where somebody gets shot by the police, and it's under the guise of, we need to protect them, we're checking in on them. Oh, they just seem slightly too dangerous to themselves, so we're going to take out their life. Like, how? It's infuriating.
Well said. I don't have much to add. The very problematic but still brilliant Carl Jung said, what we can't stand in ourselves, we can't stand in others. Totally. So when we don't have a culture that normalizes feelings of death, feelings of non-existence, feelings of oblivion, all these things that people do deal with, we can't allow others to feel that either. And we need to allow agency in that way.
Let me any follow-up, Sula, before I ask my bonus question?
No, I think, yeah, I'm also really learning from everyone on this panel. I think, Carly, what you said was beautifully put, and yes, totally agree, that it really starts in you know, our own work and making the space to have and hold these compassionate conversations around how we truly exist that are honest. And from then we can create a culture that is more opened up to our full experience of life, which includes wanting to die and includes talking about the natural or the other processes of dying.
So while we have about 5 minutes before we get into final thoughts, I wanted to just throw out a bonus question, and that is, what are some recent breakthroughs, and it's a serious question, what are some recent breakthroughs in death care, and what are some things that you're possibly looking forward to happening in the near future?
I'm really excited about this thing happening right now in Washington State. It's the first state to legalize decomposing bodies. These incredible women have created a beautifully designed, they're architects and they're scientists, and they've got a board of people who are, you know, heavy hitters in the death trade, doulas and funeral directors, and they've created essentially a funeral home service that incorporates decomposition. And I think it's a really exciting venture. I think it's totally the future. Burial in its most traditional ways, super harmful to the planet. Cremation is also super harmful to the planet. There's something called aquamation that I'm not super familiar with, but it's exactly as it sounds. It's liquefying a body. That's also a better option for the earth. But I think this decomposition thing is really neat because of the soil that's created. And if you actually look at their space that they've created, these pods where people can visit and take that soil and use that soil, it's a really interesting thing. I would also say, I think that I know that there's a growing movement of home funerals, and I'm also really passionate about that work because it's an option that a lot of people just don't know exists. A lot of people don't know that you can actually, you know, take a body home from a care home or a hospital, and with the assistance of a doula or home funeral practitioner, you can make sure the body is physically taken care of. It's frozen, and then you can, you know, there's this whole process of caring for the body through breathing rituals and just spending extra time with a person who has died is incredibly it has the impacts on the grief process are really beautiful. It's not to say that any of these things make the grief any easier, the loss any lighter, but there are really beautiful rituals that I feel like are existing more and more, and people are reaching out for alternatives to death care more than ever. And then I think that, you know, they really contribute to not re-traumatizing the experience of death by having a huge loss and then going through, you know, a funeral home that charges you money and tells you that there's only, you know, is it the cherry mahogany or is it the whatever? There are more options, and I think, you know, I just want to encourage people to reach out to doulas and see what's available in their state or province. But those are a couple of things that I'm pretty excited about.
Well, I'm glad I reached out to this doula. And so before we bring it home, does anyone have any additional questions or follow-ups, Joel or Carly, before we get into final thoughts for Sula?
I'm really excited to go down a rabbit hole about that Washington community. So thank you for giving me my week's obsession.
So cool. They really deserve, it's an amazing thing that's happening.
That's great.
All right. Oh, yes. Go ahead, Joel.
Perhaps it's a bit gauche, but I'll throw out a quick advert, which makes sense in this context, which is that California enacted an end-of-life, medically assisted end-of-life act in January, and it requires a psychological evaluation. And I'm really looking to get into that work and help people with that. And so if anybody wants to network or talk about that, please, and Sula as well, if you'd like to chat offline. I think that's something very meaningful that can be done for many people.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and if you tweet about it, Joel, we'll make sure to retweet it from the official SPSM Chat.
Official, nice.
Yes, okay, so let's get into final thoughts. And while you're on the screen already, final thoughts, Dr. Joel Schwartz.
I don't know if I have any. I'm kind of in this contemplative space, just thinking about what we've talked about and being very appreciative that we were able to kind of delve deep, and also wanted to thank Carly for her vulnerability today. Thank you.
Thank you, Joel. I'm glad you were able to join us. Make sure to follow. Are you still tweeting, Joel?
Not so much, but I am on Twitter, yes.
Okay. Be nice to Joel on Twitter. So at Dr. Joel Schwartz, final thoughts, Carly LARSON.
My final thoughts are, I think we need to stop being so scared of death as a culture. And I think I really like hearing that death doulas are starting to expand and be more accessible. Maybe they always have been. I haven't heard about them until more recently. But I think if we need a cultural change of like honoring death more and being okay when people want to die or are dying and letting them have agency over that. We are so about individualistic rights and allowing people to have agency in nearly everything they do. And then when it's death, it's like, nope, we're done. So I think that is like a huge, huge culture change that needs to happen. And I think the work of death doula sounds like it's the right ticket.
Thanks, Carly. Is there anything we need to abolish as soon as this live stream is over?
The prison industrial complex and the police, institutionalization, capitalism. I could keep going. We should probably pause and let Sula.
Final thoughts, Sula.
Super grateful to be in conversation with all of you, and thank you so much for creating the space to have these conversations. It's really so necessary now and always. I do want to shout out to a few doulas that are doing incredible things. Specifically, there's black doulas and women of color who are doing incredible work in the field right now. Oceana Sawyer, Alua Arthur, her name's The Glorious Hum on Instagram. Sisters in Loss is an excellent space for women and women of color who are experiencing loss around pregnancy and infant loss. But also, I guess other final thoughts are to say that, death work is on all of us to do in life. It's not just doula work, but also when you're, facing death of a loved one or a community member, know that you don't need to do all of that alone, and there are other options. And actually engaging with a doula or an end-of-life guide and facilitator earlier on in your life to have these conversations, create plans, know your options, alleviates a lot of stress and pressure on the moment surrounding death, so you can actually be with your person, or you can be in whatever experience that is. Engaging doulas, it's something that people don't know that they need until they've gone through like a death experience and it happened so fast and suddenly they're in a funeral home and then it was all over within 5 days. And just a reminder that it doesn't need to be that way. So reaching out to a doula at any point in life is a great opportunity for you to even start that conversation in your life and in your relationships, and creating a death plan or an advanced care plan at any stage. You don't need to be actively dying or have just received a terminal diagnosis. We're all dying. So figure out your death plan. That's one of my biggest final thoughts is get that death plan on paper and then share it with people so they know what it is. So they can honor your wishes, and they can that will alleviate, you know, some stress when they're going through the process of your death as well. That's a huge gift to give to people. So it's a bunch of random things, but those are my final thoughts.
What is piecing out?
Oh yeah, piecing out. That's my website. I'm so bad at promoting that way.
I'm here.
I'm also bad at Twitter. Sorry, but yeah, piecing out. You can reach out to me and my partner Doula Marifel, who is in LA. But as things are living virtually, we're happy to talk about any of these contemplations. And there are doulas popping up all over everywhere right now. So do some Googling. The Order of the Good Death is a fantastic place to start in terms of learning about the death positive movement, and funeral directors who are really taking such a leadership role in the field, doing incredible things. Also, Radical Death Studies is an excellent place to learn. They are scholars who are looking critically at how to decolonize our death practices, and I've learned so much from them. So I'm forever grateful to them and always want to plug them up. Radical Death Studies.
Thank you so much, Sula. If you're so inclined, if you have the time, please give me an email, Sula. I'd love to put those links on the blog and tweet them out.
Okay.
So no rush, because
right
I've got 10 million other things I got to do right now anyway.
Right.
But I definitely want to make sure we get those on the blog eventually. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Sula Johnson, death doula, all around great person.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Joel Schwartz. Thank you,
You're
Carly
welcome.
Larson. See you soon, Carly. And so that's going to do it for this week. Next week, there is no show because no one's going to watch on July 5th anyway, if we're being honest with ourselves. So in 2 weeks, I think this is news to you, Joel and Carly. We're actually going to take a back seat, and we're going to have a special guest host, Brandon J. Johnson. He's going to, for lack of a better word, we're going to have a all-black SPSM Chat team, and it is long overdue. That is going to be for 1 week only, but maybe if it's a big hit and Brandon and his team do well, I'm sure they'll want to come on again. Or if anyone else, if you're a person of color and you would want to guest host SPSM Chat, let me know, or else I'm going to come find you. So that's going to do it. Thank you all. I appreciate you. I'm glad we can talk about death and have some fun with it. So until next week, I will let Carly give the sign-off line.
Peace out.
Peacing out always.